My personal expression of this is that a qualitative leap inwards, it spans outwards in all directions. So this gives us hope. In other words, where are these angels to put the world right? Here we are. Here you are. This is it. The good news is I sense that there is an action in the world. The bad news is it's up to us.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, go ahead.
There is a recurring statement on the title track of your Exposure album. Quote, "It is impossible to achieve the aim without suffering."
Yes.
Could you elaborate a little on that? Does that have something
Certainly.
to do with what
All
you're
this at
speaking of?
11:28 in the morning.
Yeah, it's too heavy for me.
All right. But bear in mind on Saturday evening at home with a jolly and feeling relaxed with one's feet up.
People will sit back and
mellow out
learn.
to it all. All right. It is impossible to achieve the aim without suffering.
Right.
As well as several other statements that seem to be by the same man.
Yes, let's concentrate on this one for now. The statement is actually taken from the first inaugural address to Sherborne House in October 1971. It is impossible to achieve the aim without suffering. All right, if one is moving from Los Angeles to San Francisco, but one believes that one is in Phoenix, one's route is likely to be confusing, to say the least. In fact, there's a remarkably good chance that one might never get to San Francisco. So first of all, one has to be aware of the situation in which one is. To have a direct glimpse of that situation is quite terrifying. When I'd been at Sherborne House for some 2 months, I was down by the woodwork shop, and in a flash, the insight or whatever lasted about half a second, and I simply saw that Robert Fripp didn't exist. And it wasn't a question of pulling out my tomes on esoteric psychology, cosmology, lectures 28. I simply saw that there was nothing there. Nothing there. But there was something, but it wasn't Robert Fripp. Robert Fripp simply wasn't there. It was just an arbitrary construct. It's quite terrifying, simply to know that one doesn't exist. So I would say that was a situation of exposure.
Aha.
And it was terrifying. So it's impossible to achieve the aim unless you see where you are. And it's painful. Fortunately, although I remember the situation and because of it I have a different relationship with whatever I might be, the terror of just seeing that in a flash doesn't live with me. I think it's very considerable grace that we have fictions by which to live, that I know they're fictions, we know they're fictions, but anyway, the other particular side of this notion of suffering, that some suffering is necessary, it's inevitable, but a lot of suffering isn't. For example, I tend to be a little greedy, and I suffer dreadfully for that. But it's not necessary. So if I can somehow manage to give up my greedy impulses, there's an awful lot of suffering, unnecessary suffering, which I don't have to bother with, leaving me the energy to get on with the necessary kind of suffering. If you've ever tried to do someone a good turn without in any way expecting something for yourself in terms of hidden agenda and so on, it's interesting to note that one never gets thanked. If someone comes up to you on the street and say, have you got a quarter? And you say, oh, here's a quarter. Only a quarter? Come on, you're well heeled, give me a buck. And so it goes on. But if one is genuinely trying to work with this idea of, just trying to commit oneself to a sense of appropriate behaviour, decent behaviour, however one expresses it for oneself, there is this irony that you'll always get a kick up the backside. But if your commitment is a real one, you'll try and keep going with it. You know, this is the idea of conscious labour and intentional suffering. That you know you're going to get kicked up the backside, and you really don't want to, but you're going to have to do it anyway.
But you're at least prepared for it, if you
Well,
know it.
There's a different sense of dealing with the situation. Now, anyone who's got anywhere near the notion of public service, no one would campaign to be elected for public service if they were genuinely interested in public service. It's a very considerable responsibility, for which one is only really spat upon.
Right.
For me, this drive to 1981 and coming out into the marketplace is a discipline. I'm a somewhat private person who considerably enjoys the company of people, but nevertheless I have a need for my own privacy, and I don't get it in this situation. But it's more than compensated for a number of reasons. One, a sense that I meet a lot of remarkably good people who more than outweigh the odd proportions of the person who's come along to, as Peter Hamill would express it, be an energy vampire. There are some ways of looking at people like this. The young enthusiast at my feet who is stealing everything I have with his eyes. I said to one man 2 nights ago, there are ways of looking, but staring only takes. And he modified the way he was using his eyes. And last night I could sense, and I can't demonstrate this empirically, but my sensitivity to crowd responses is fairly acute, if only because of some 3.5 months of doing this, 3 months of doing this, that I can tell when there is concentration and intention and when there isn't, and last night there wasn't. That if one has a balloon of air, one only needs one hole in it, and it goes.
Right.
There was the gentleman there with the cassette machine, specifically after the ticket said no cassette machines, specifically after I asked people not to turn them on, he turned it on, and felt no responsibility whatsoever for his action. I found that so intrusive that even if one didn't agree with my presentation, purely as an act of human courtesy, one would not have turned on the cassette machine in that situation, and yet he did.